Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. And great to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. So I just want to welcome everyone. We're excited to kind of share with you the work that Kesstan and I have been doing with archetype. You'll notice we've got type in parentheses around trying to bring the two together. And that's what we're doing here. We're looking at the meeting of nurture, what we call, which archetype, and nature type. As you know, if you read the bios, Kesstan and I, you can see the slide. We both work at CAPT. Center for Applications of Psychological Type. And archetype was conceived and developed through our work at CAPT and all of our years of experience in type, and there's been a lot, and also our expertise with archetypes, because we both have PhDs in Jungian psychology. So we've spent a lot of time studying that. So in 2021, Kesstan and I presented on archetype and type, highlighting a correlational study. And that was conducted at CAPT. We're going to share some of those results with you later. And we presented that at the Australia APTI conference, where we shared an expansive literature review. So if anyone wants to see it, you're welcome to it. Our work has evolved, and it's built upon that work of the scholars who came before us. So Tony Wolfe, Tad and Noreen Guzzi, John Giannini, they all were exploring theoretical and experiential relationships between type and archetype. However, none of them had access to an archetype indicator, an assessment. That's where we come in. So we are in a unique position doing the work that we're doing with archetype, because we do research and development with both the MBTI and the PMAI systems. And we are the publishers for the Pearson-Marr Archetype Indicator assessment. So we're in a really unique position being able to work with both those assessments. Now, since that initial presentation, feels like forever ago, we've continued our research. We've presented at several conferences. We've conducted a beginner and advanced workshop with APT. Thank you to those who participated in that. It is here where we were able to kind of test out our theories. So along with the quantitative research done in 2021, we also now have qualitative research, and that's based on our own lived experience, friends and family, the experiences of those who attended our pilot workshops. So today, we're here to share with you a little glimpse, and trust me, it's just a glimpse into what we've uncovered, to give you an opportunity not only to learn a little bit about what we're doing, but to get to experience it for yourself. We can go very deep into this material, and we will, just not today.
Yeah.
So nurture and nature. We connect archetypes with nurture because they're fluid, they're dynamic, they impact the development and expression of the personality. We connect type with nature because type is more of a fixed structure and personality. The preferences are part of our predisposition and do not change, however, they do develop over time. Now, in our research, we've seen two ways that archetypes show up for people: in identity and as narratives. Now, in identity, we see that specific archetypes enhance and amplify certain characteristics in our type. Whereas narratives, the archetypes are more of a guiding, overarching force that impacts attitudes, interpretations, biases, and actions in people. Now, as narratives, archetypes can have a direct impact on the development of our type. So just like family, culture, environment can impact the expression of our type, we find that archetypes do too. So it's involved, especially when we get into the narrative aspect of archetypes. That's future workshops that we're excited and hope that you'll be able to join us. To simplify things for today's session, we're going to focus on identity. So to give you an idea of what we're talking about, Kesstan, do you mind giving us an example from your own experience?
Yes. So I just want to mention here, it's probably obvious, but when we're talking about archetypes in this presentation, of course, we're talking about the 12 PMAI archetypes, and we'll be going over those in a moment, and we have a handout for them. So an example from my experience of the link between identity in my type and archetypal characters that I identify with. My preferences are for INTJ. And two archetypes that typically come up at the top of my profile when I take the PMAI assessment are ruler, and another one is seeker. Ruler, my experience of ruler is that I really identify with it through, and it amplifies the TJ aspect of my personality. The organization, the decision-making, being in an authority, and that this typically is brought out. This is really at work. I really live out the ruler. The seeker I'm more identified with that through the introverted intuition, my dominant function. And while I bring that everywhere I go, that really comes out in my personal creative work, where I use more of that perceiving function, and I'm more flexible, adventuresome even, and exploring possibilities, and just broadly seeking answers to my questions. So that's one way that we're talking about identity links between type and archetype.
Thank you, Kesstan. So I'm going to share two examples as well. The first one will be about identity for me, and then I just want to give you a taste of what narrative looks like. So when I took the PMAI in my profile, creator was one of the top 3 archetypes. So what does that look like then when you bring creator together with my preferences for ENFJ? Well, extroverted feeling focuses on supporting others and encouraging their growth. The creator archetype brings forward an innovative, creative, and original way of doing this. So for me, for example, I was a math teacher 100 years ago, and I created a golf game to teach geometry to support those students who were struggling with math concepts and traditional teaching methods. I also brought math poetry into the classroom, and I feel that creator part of me comes through my personality type. So I identify with that. Okay, that fits for me. It kind of amplifies my personality. So what does it look like in a narrative? So for me, the number 1 archetype that showed up was revolutionary. It was number 1, top. And you'll get to see what all these archetypes are in a moment. So with the revolutionary, it isn't usually this high. So at first, it did kind of surprise me. But based on the state of the world, I'm a Canadian living in Texas, revolutionary at the top actually isn't too surprising after all. I desire harmony, no question. But I've been called to be more assertive with my opinions, positions around controversial topics, and that's even if it promotes disharmony. Now, it's a little uncomfortable, but I do it. And I've been kind of called to be more assertive with my opinions and positions around controversial topics, even if it does promote that disharmony. So authentic relationships matter to me, okay? So when I see that people are threatened or disavowed, I need to tell it like it is, even if it feels uncomfortable to do so. So extroverted feeling softens my revolutionary approach to situations. I know what needs to be said and done, but sometimes I come at it with an indirect approach and feel a little angst within. This revolutionary narrative in my life has helped my personality type to evolve, mature, and develop by calling on extroverted thinking. So it comes through. And extroverted thinking for me is in the 8th position for those of you looking at the 8-function model. And when it comes through my feeling preference. So where I may be direct, but I'm going to do it in a way that still holds harmony and relationships at the forefront. So that's an example of what, how an archetype, when activated or constellated, coming into your life due to a circumstance or situation, can impact the expression of your own personality type. So due to time, as I mentioned already at the start, we're just going to barely touch the surface. So for today, we're going to be providing experiences of the PMAI archetypes as characters that influence the expression of our type. Archetypes as characters, it's really about identity. It's the identity aspect of archetypes. Now, in later workshops, we're going to cover archetypes as narratives, and we'll also bring in things like blind spot, shadow, and then along with type, looking at inferior function and overuse of the dominant. They all fit together, as well as other topics, but that's for the future. So as you can see, there's so much more we can do with archetype. So if you're interested, make sure you sign up at StoryWell to be notified of future workshops. And we're going to give you that information at the end. Kesstan.
Great. You always give great stories, Yvonne. You're a good storyteller. So now we're gonna briefly go through the Pearson-Marr Archetype Indicator. I recognize a number of you from our workshops before. We do a lot with the type community in our workshops. So hopefully you have some familiarity with them. These aren't long descriptions. We do have a PDF for you, and I believe that's in the chat. Is it in the chat already, Yvonne?
Richard's going to be putting it there. Richard,
Okay,
you can put it in there now if you haven't already. Thank you.
Yeah, so you will have that when you go to the breakout. So I'm just going to go through and read out the basic statements that give you the essence of the characters. Similar to type, archetypes are pretty straightforward and symbolic, so they're easy to get in that sense. And as I describe these 12 archetypes, just see which ones you resonate with, assuming you haven't taken the PMAI. If you do, you know your profile and what's at the top. See which ones you identify with, which ones you resonate with, and just write them down or note them for yourself. You will be working with them in the breakout sessions, and we're going to have a couple of those. So, and that is in the chat. You'll have that. So I'm ready to go. Yvonne?
All right, here we go.
Advancing the screen. Okay, thanks, Richard. So we start with caregiver. Caregiver as a character archetype is kind and nurturing, able to see the good in others and to develop it in others as well. The creator is an innovative, creative person who follows their muse and expresses originality. That's a big thing for creator. Idealist is a person of faith and trust in the goodness of life and can carry that with hope through the darkness. Jester is symbolically the wise fool who uses humor to bring levity and pleasure to the painful realities of life. Lover is one who knows love and lives fully intimate with life, with others, with passion and gusto. Magician is also called a shaman and an alchemist who knows the secrets and power of what is hidden and knows how to use it. Realist is a sensible, likable, humble everyman. That's another title for it, who has earned common sense through hardship and is loyal to their tribe. Revolutionary is a liberator of the people who is unafraid to challenge the status quo and eliminate what does not work. Ruler is a beneficent authority who creates order and rules with magnanimity and wisdom as a humble servant. The sage is a trusted intellectual who guides others with knowledge, data, logic, and wisdom. Seeker is an adventurer who explores the inner and/or outer worlds with enthusiasm, freedom, and seeks authenticity. And warrior is a champion who courageously confronts threats to the principles that hold a people, community, or society together. So we want to go over a little bit of the research, a little bit more of the research, and demonstrate for you a little bit more this connection between type and archetype that we found. Yvonne, in the beginning of the presentation, gave a really good broad overview of all of the research that we've done. So I'm going to focus here for just a few moments on a large correlational study that we did. This had over 1,000 respondents in it who took both the PMAI and gave their MBTI type. And so we correlated how the archetypes and type met. And what we did here was we analyzed it for the highest scoring types on each of the 12 archetypes, and then the lowest, because the lowest also gives you insight into the archetypes. So I have just 3 here that I'm going to highlight for you, and then Yvonne's going to highlight and discuss some of the case studies and stories through our qualitative work. So first is caregiver, the caregiver archetype. The highest scoring types were extroverted feeling types, and that would be predicted, right? That was expected. Caregiver is an active nurturer, reaching out and responding to others' needs. So the qualities of extroversion are brought out in this archetype. A preference for feeling is expected, and that's there, being people-oriented and empathic, but also combined with the extroversion, because the caregiver is very outgoing in addressing needs. What's insightful is also, if you see there, the lowest scoring types for caregiver would also be what are expected: introversion and thinking in INTP and INTJ. The next one is realist. In realist, the highest scoring types were 2 sensing types, ISTJ and ESTJ. The sensing preference is expected. The realist archetype amplifies the concrete, grounded, present time focus of sensing, and also a reliance on memory and past experience is important in the realist character. The lowest scoring types for realist, again, what we might expect, the 2 extroverted perceiving types, the gregarious outgoing types. And they come up again in our final illustration on gesture. The highest scoring types for gesture were the extroverted perceiving, ESTP and ENFP, outgoing, gregarious, social, fun-loving. So these types are highlighted or pulled out. It makes sense that they link to them in identity. The lowest scoring types for gesture are ISTJ and INFJ. ISTJ may be more obvious for us. It's often called the workhorse of the type world, and it's grounded in reality and can be a bit pessimistic. But INFJ may not be as obvious, but it's not, INFJ isn't described as pessimistic, but they are typically emotionally intense and quite serious. So that gives us some insight into the low score on the gesture. So now Yvonne's going to go through some of our stories and case studies that we've collected from people in the workshops that we've done to demonstrate this.
Great, thanks, Kesstan. So as I go through these examples, I want you to start kind of thinking about those archetypes that you felt, drawn to, and think about it in relationship to your personality type. When we go into breakout, which isn't now, the examples I'm about to share with you, I'm hoping will help clarify what it is we're asking you to do when you get together to talk about this between yourselves. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share some examples with you. So Kesstan, at the very beginning of our talk today, spoke to you about, for her, INTJ ruler and INTJ seeker, and how they show up in her life. And as I mentioned already, when I took the PMAI assessment, my top 3 archetypes, number 1, revolutionary. I shared that with you already in a story about that, I believe, was activated due to situation and narrative. Then it was magician, and then creator. Now, I've already shared with you how creator impacts my personality type. So now I'd like to share with you, what does it look like with ENFJ preferences and the magician archetype? And this is how I see it for myself. If you think about ENFJ, introverted intuition. Okay, it's my auxiliary, but I access it a lot. It's about imagination. It's about seeing meanings and connections. And, as my auxiliary, it does support extroverted feeling. Now, what does the magician archetype do for that? I believe it amplifies introverted intuition. It gives me, it's this uncanny ability that I can almost see things that others may not. And I know that may sound strange, but that happens. And I rely on it. I really do, because it helps me kind of read between the lines. So it's kind of that shaman who knows the secrets of what is hidden. And I bring that with me when I'm working with clients. Kesstan and I, when we do work together as well, she'll often laugh when we're trying to pull something together, and I'll respond with, "Oh, don't worry about it, Kesstan. It'll be fine. We will pull, 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 ta-da." And she often laughs at that. So,
And I laugh.
but I feel that. It feels that way. And in our workshops, we've worked with, several people, and I want to bring in an example of ENFJ again, not that I just want to focus on my type, but what it might look like with somebody who has lover as one of their top scoring archetypes. Well, we find that lover aligns naturally with NF. Okay, so the two together, highly attuned to others. Lover, fully intimate with life and others with passion. Well, ENFJ preferences that people, they radiate warmth and energy, and lover can then amplify that natural style for ENFJ preferences.
Yeah.
And I want to share with you a story of a young client of mine. He happens to prefer ESFP. He's already outgoing, gregarious, social, and he's fun-loving too. And it's no wonder, guess what appears near the top of his archetype profile? The jester, because it aligns so beautifully, as Kesstan was talking about. So how does that show up in his life? Well, as we talked through and spent some time together, for him, he's like, absolutely, this fits. He brings humor in to lighten any tense situation. And he really notices it. He's young, he's a gamer, he likes to game with friends. And Jester was one of his top 3 when it took the assessment. It just aligns beautifully with that. So that's giving you a lot of emphasis on identity. Okay, so how do you identify and how do they come together? We did touch on narrative, so I just want to give you one more example on what we mean by narrative, just in case it comes up for you when you're in your breakouts.
Right.
That's future workshops. So we'd love to have you join us down the road if this is something that interests you. So a male client of mine prefers INFP, okay? Ruler was at the top of his profile. Now, if you think about ruler, this could be a little bit of a surprise with this placement, because people who prefer INFP, they're often our supportive coaches. And that kind of tends to be his natural leadership style. However, so when he saw it, it's like a little bit, just like I was with revolutionary. But upon reflection, and the further we discussed it, he realized that ruler likely came to the top because he is in a high-level leadership role. He works with police, fire, and military leaders. He values networking and connection. So he believes that ruler was constellated to help support him in this role. So what may have started off as kind of awkward and uncomfortable as he was bringing forward that, leading with authenticity, that rules and leading in that style, for him now feels more natural. So if you think about it from a type perspective, ruler has helped him develop his inferior extroverted thinking process. And this is the direction we're kind of going at when we start looking at narrative. How is it impacting the development of your personality type? So that's just an example for you.
Yeah. And that's why we call it, again, that's why we align it with nurture. And I think that your example, revolutionary, and this one with ruler demonstrates that so well, that archetypes aren't just, we identify with some of them and they're always hanging around in our PMAI profile when we take it over, but there's also these other ones that get constellated in important relationships and environment situations for us, and they impact us typically to grow, is what we find. Yeah. It's a great story.
Great. Thank you, Kesstan. So I hope we've provided you enough examples. We've made some mistakes in the past where our first workshop, we dove right in. Let's dig into allies and overuse of dominant and blind spot. And yeah, we were excited, but probably left people going, what are they talking about? So we're trying to bring this back to kind of just a starting level so that you can get a taste of it and see how it fits for you. Can you see this in yourself? And we're so interested in finding out what it is you think of this and what you have discovered in your breakouts.
Absolutely.
So I hope we've given you enough examples of what it looks like when we bring archetype and type together. So we want you to get a chance now to play around with that and see if it resonates with you. So Kesstan, if you want to go ahead and explain what we're asking them to do in breakouts.
So we're going to, you're going to be put into breakout rooms, I think of 3, 2, 3, however that's going to shake out for you. As you were going through and I asked you to select like 2 or 3, just choose one. You'll be able to work with another one after this. One that you clearly resonate with, and you know that, and go into the group and just start talking to your group mates about how this is connected to type in the ways that Yvonne and I have demonstrated. We're going to give 10 minutes for this, right, Yvonne? And then,
yes.
And then we're going to have a group discussion after to sort of debrief and get some ideas and insights from you before we go into the next one. Anything else, Yvonne?
I think that covers it. But before we go into breakout, what questions do you have for us?
They just want to go.
I'm counting to 10, Kesstan. I'm practicing that. Alina.
Yeah, just as I guess a logistical question. If there's one that maybe seems more narratively influenced, should we save that for the second round? Or does that matter?
You play with it, Alina. Kesstan, you may say something different. We're looking at identity and archetype, and the next breakout, you get to do this twice. You'll get to choose another archetype, but if you see it clearly as narrative, go for it.
Yeah.
See how that fits for you.
And that's a great question, because that's why we brought in the narrative, and Yvonne had 2 clear stories on narrative from her life and her work, because we thought that it might come up, and even though it wasn't our primary focus, we wanted to give you enough guidance. So do whatever is working for you right now. It's going to bring you the most insight.
And just a question for myself is I've noticed that there are 2 archetypes in particular I'm drawn to, but one is the one I identify with myself, but another one is the one that I think other people see in me, which is a different one. And I often get cast into that role, often against, even though I don't always want to be doing that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
fine. That's fine. And that would be interesting to contrast them in the 2 breakout groups. And just for Yvonne and I mean, that hasn't come up yet. That's a nice nuanced perspective that you get cast into that role. That's new for us. So if you wanted to explore that on our behalf, we'd be very interested in what you have to say.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, Richard will go ahead and put them in breakout, and we will see all of you back in 10 minutes.
I guess I'll dive in quickly. It's a pretty neat pairing, and in particular, not myself, but we had a couple of INTJs, so the same type, but you could see like some of the archetypes really resonated with one of them, and different archetypes resonated with the other ones. And so just this idea of, like you're saying, nature, nurture, and I kind of find that too, like particularly with my family, the way that structure was kind of helped I kind of picture it as kind of helped deform a little bit the shape of INT to get a little bit oriented towards, a parent that has introverted intuition, or even the pairings of introverted feeling, extroverted thinking. Like that polarity was very dominant in my family. Of the 6 of us. So it's fun to kind of see that how it shapes each of them.
Yes. Yeah.
Elizabeth Murphy's had to leave because she had some visitors arrive, but asked me to report back on her behalf because it was a group of the 2 of us. But what struck me in our conversation was when each of us were talking about an archetype which appealed to us. We weren't that sure to begin with, but then we found that we had lots to say about it. So Elizabeth started talking about her rebel side, which was linked to the revolutionary. I'm not sure about this, and then went on to tell me about all the ways in which she rebels against conventional wisdom. Her type, she identified with INFP, and how it was freeing people from fixed views, and that I've seen that in a lot of my own INFP friends. So that was I actually gave her the feedback. You've talked so passionately about that. That must be important for you.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's interesting. We know Elizabeth, and I definitely know the rebel in her. So that absolutely makes sense. Yeah, she's very innovative and thinks differently.
Yeah, and my own identification, there's no prizes for that one. It's the magician.
Yes.
Which I'm looking back now, I've strongly identified with from as long as I can remember. It's why I became a scientist in the first place, because the alchemy of chemistry and fire and transforming things into other things, and my journey to growth is using my knowledge to affect change in the world on multiple levels, including actually magic at sometimes it seems like. But the one I get cast into by others is the sage. Because invariably I picked up lots of knowledge and things over the years. So people have come to me for knowledge and advice when that's not always what I've want. I've actually got my own, should we say, magical projects I want to be getting on with, rather than continually giving people the same information over and over again. Can be, I'm patient and I'm happy, comfortable in that role, but there can be a little bit of a what other people won't see when they come to me for advice is the internal sense of my heart thinking, oh no, here's the 15th person in a row coming in for advice, and I'm not going to get anything done with my day today.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting, Stuart, is that you're confirming something we've heard from other people, is that for people it's really clear typically what is something they identify with and what is something that's a role or an archetype that's more constellated in a situation, even a time of life. Like some people will say that archetype was more prominent for me when I was younger, or when I was married, or when I wasn't married, or all of that. And people typically talk about them, even when they're first working with them, really clearly on, that's something I really identify with. That's something I can be comfortable with, but that's not my identity. It's where we've found them show up as both. Yeah.
So I'm looking at the time, Kesstan. Yeah, thank you so much. Looking at the time, and if we want them to do one more breakout where you can pick a different archetype and see how it relates, we're going to shorten this next breakout and then bring you back with about 8 to 10 minutes left so that we can kind of wrap things up, continuing our discussion.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing. Thank you. All right. Is that sound okay, Kesstan? We'll
that's great.
Okay. Great.
That's
off
great.
You go. Richard will send you off again, and we look forward to hearing what you come up with when you come back. Does this seem to work for you? So yeah, feel free to unmute and share if you like.
Dario, if you're talking, you're muted.
Okay, I actually unmuted myself and then it remuted me again. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that I was thinking maybe the people who are drawn to this kind of conference and discussion might tend toward, we're not going to get a particular kind, say, of INTP or INTJ that might be in a very different environment. There's going to be ones who are interested in psychology and that kind of thing. But then the secondary role, or another one that people relate to, a secondary archetype, that actually could be quite different and could really then. So I'm really happy that we had a chance to explore a second one.
Good.
That was, I just felt that was nice, because then it's like, oh, well, then a lot more of it can come up.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope to do more of that, Dario, with our upcoming workshops as well, is to be able to try to dig in a little bit deeper and explore, because they're a variety. I mean, they, like Kesstan was saying, they rise and fall. We typically have a few that, stick with us because we really identify with them, but others can kind of rise and fall.
Catherine.
What I think this illustrated so beautifully was the ways in which archetypes connect us to something larger than ourselves. Because as soon as we started talking in both groups, and yes, we were all had a preference for intuition. However, the feeling that there was a well of information that would suddenly be available to us as we connected to these archetypes really, I think, is a great gift and brings us into the fullness of some of Jung's ideas about how our psyche operates.
Yeah.
Beautifully said, Catherine.
Yeah, well said.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well
Which is
said.
why we
Here's
get
the
so
question.
excited with this work.
Would the here's a question I've got for you, Yvonne and Kesstan. Would the sort of particularly in fiction, the sort of stories or characters you're drawn to for entertainment or purposes, would that also reflect some of your preferred archetypes?
I believe so.
Oh, I love this. We have a story, Kesstan, my family, my story about the gamers in my family. Talks exactly about that. If you go to StoryWell, there are storywell.com. Well, actually, I'll show you the slide now since we're bringing it up, just so you have it. Yeah, I've actually written about the three men in my family, and they play a game called World of Warcraft, and how do the archetypes impact their choice of character, how they work that character. And it was so much fun. I don't know anything about the game, so they helped me write it, but it was quite fascinating.
It's a great article, and we're just publishing this month and next month a follow-up article from one of our staff members who loves World of Warcraft, and he analyzed the PMAI archetypes along all of the world of Warcraft, like the archetypal elements of it. So, and then Carol Pearson has written a lot. I mean, the PMAI is built on her work, and her latest book from a couple of years ago, What Stories Are You Living? She has like a whole chapter, I think it's chapter 10, which is just beautiful. It goes through all 12 archetypes, and it goes through how they've expressed in myth, fairy tale, films, culture. I mean, it's really gorgeous what she does with that. And there has been some research on other archetype systems where they have correlated in studies fiction and movie characters and things like that, that people are, even types of music, with archetypal characters that they were attracted to.
I'm so glad you mentioned the role-playing games as well, because I've been playing the original Dungeons and Dragons since it was invented in the 1970s, and almost invariably end up playing some kind of magician.
Yes. Yeah.
So you'll like the article, then you'll relate.
Yeah.
Because my son NF as well, and really fits for him.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's funny that you mentioned that. So I too, probably since 1982, something like that. And I've been working on over the years, like how to play particular personality types, and including ones that are quite distant, like ESTP or ESTJ, something like the ESFP. And there really is like an approach that can go through to help like prepare and sort of coach myself in order to think and role play like somebody else, not as a different player, but as the character being different, and including getting into the kind of trouble that people of that type would get into. Yeah. And that's fun. Yeah. And it's amazing what kind of trouble ESTJs can get into. And why they do what they do. And that was, unfortunately, in all of them, I had, examples to draw upon. But that really is, I think it's very possible, and it's a wonderful way to, and it doesn't have to be fantasy with Dungeons and Dragons. It can be any kind of environment, like science fiction or modern. Is just plain like, how can we coach ourselves to play a different archetype of ourselves?
Yes. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. And really actively train ourselves on those different perspectives and really leaning into them, not just reading about them, but actually acting them out in games. I think that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. And it was even cool over a period of time to experience type development for that character's type. That where the ESTP has like suddenly an NI experience.
Yeah.
And that's it's
well, that's fast. That's great, Daria. That's exactly where we're taking this work, and in our future workshops is how does that impact the development, working with your non-preferred processes. How can this help with that? It's really fascinating. Well, I'm aware that it's time. We're 1 minute over, but thank you so much, everybody. I mean, I know Kesstan has somewhere to be. I could stick around for a couple minutes if there are more questions, but just want to thank all of you. And if you're interested in taking the PMAI assessment, go to storywell.com. I've got the slide up for you, and reach out to us, email us if you have any questions or want to be informed, because there are workshops coming out next year, and we'll be doing it through a series. So we really want to look at development in bringing in the PMAI as well as personality type.
Yeah, and if you do have any questions or insights or anything following up on today, do feel free to just shoot us an email. We'd love to hear from people that we've worked with and get into conversations. That's exciting for us. We love to gather stories. We really
want to hear your stories. And we are we'll be starting to publish on this. So it's now that we've got, had the workshops and, the talking with so many people, we're able to now kind of carry that work forward. So watch for that as well. Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. So great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. That was great. That was wonderful.